40 floors up in a tower built to be unbreakable, an alarm no one was meant to hear began to pulse in the dark. Not a scream. A whisper. The kind a machine makes when something patient has already slipped inside. The most powerful woman in the building didn't know it yet. Her engineers didn't know it yet. They'd swept the floors, secured the vaults, locked every door that money could lock. And still someone was walking through the walls, not smashing them, studying them, tracing the blueprint of a billion-dollar empire the way a thief runs his fingers along a windowsill slow, certain already knowing which one will open. Downstairs, a man in a gray uniform stopped pushing his cart. He tilted his head. He listened, because he knew that sound. He'd built the thing that made it, and the only person who could stop what was coming was the one person nobody in that glass tower had ever bothered to see. The executive floor was the kind of quiet that money buys. Marble that had never known a scuff. Glass walls that turned the city into a painting. And 40 stories below, the traffic moved in rivers of light, silent from up here, like the whole world had agreed to hush. Except one voice cut through it. "You call that fixing a laptop?" Vivian Thorne stood behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars, and her voice had an edge to it, the kind that made grown engineers study their shoes. "It took my entire tech team 20 minutes. 20, and they still couldn't figure it out." The man beside her didn't flinch. He just reached over, pressed 3 keys, adjusted something buried deep in a settings menu that most people would never think to open, and closed the window before anyone in that room even understood what he'd done. The laptop restarted, smooth, clean, like it had never been broken at all. And for one long moment, the most powerful woman in that building just stared at the janitor standing next to her desk. Because sometimes the person everyone walks past understands the machine better than the people paying to run it. His name was Adrian Kessler. And the strange thing about Adrian, the thing you'd notice if you ever bothered to look, was how calm he stayed when powerful people raised their voices. He didn't rush. He didn't shrink. He simply wiped his hands on a worn cloth tucked into his belt and took one quiet step back. "Your system locked itself into diagnostic mode," he said. "I just restarted the secure partition." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You understood that?" Adrian shrugged. A small thing, almost apologetic. "Sometimes computers panic," he said, "the way people do." That answer didn't satisfy her. She was a woman who'd built an empire out of not being satisfied. Around them, the office gleamed with the particular silence of expensive things. Sculptures that meant nothing. A desk of polished glass. And in the middle of all of it stood a man in a gray uniform, oil at the edges of his gloves, a cleaning cart parked by the door. Completely out of place. And somehow completely unbothered. Vivian Thorne had spent 30 years reading people faster than they could read her. It was the whole trick of her. And something about this quiet man in the cheap uniform refused to add up. "How did you know where to look?" she asked. He hesitated, just long enough to be noticed. "Lucky guess," he said. She studied him another second, then waved her hand the way you brush away a thought that won't quite land. "Fine, whatever. Just get the hallway done. My investors are here in the morning." Adrian nodded once. "Of course." And he pushed his cart toward the door, the wheels squeaking soft across that flawless floor, the sound following him out like something he couldn't quite shake. Behind him, Vivian opened the laptop again and froze. Because in the second before he'd closed that window, she'd seen something. A program running underneath everything else. Not one her engineers had built. Not one she recognized. Architecture maps, security pathways, encrypted frameworks laid out like the blueprints of a building only a handful of people on Earth could read. It didn't look like a janitor killing time. It looked like someone studying her entire company from the inside out. She sat with that, longer than she meant to. Then she told herself it was nothing. Because it had to be nothing. Because the alternative made no sense, and Vivian Thorne did not build billions on things that made no sense. Down the hall, the man she'd already forgotten stepped out of the light. The bright office glow faded into the dim of the after-hours corridor. Cleaning carts lined the wall like tired horses, and the building hummed around him, that low mechanical breath of a place that never fully sleeps. Vents whispering, elevators shifting somewhere far off, and deeper down below all of it, the steady vibration of the server floors. Adrian let out a breath he'd been holding, then reached to the bottom shelf of his cart and pulled out a laptop of his own. Slim, black, scratched at the corners, the kind of thing you'd pass over at a yard sale. But when the screen lit up, it lit up with the same complicated beauty Vivian had glimpsed a floor away. Diagrams, pathways, lines of code scrolling like water. And buried down in the guts of it, deep inside the company's server structure, a single warning blinking red. His eyes narrowed. That's not good, because the thing had gotten worse overnight. Someone somewhere out there in the dark was testing the walls of Thorne Dynamics. Not smashing, not breaking, just knocking. Patient, careful, the way a thief runs his fingers along a windowsill before he decides which one to open. Adrian leaned back against the wall and rubbed his temples. He hadn't planned on any of this. This job was supposed to be simple, quiet, safe. A mop and a cart and a corridor. The kind of nothing that let a man breathe again. The kind of nothing that let him pick his daughter up from school every single afternoon and never once check his phone for the office. His own phone buzzed against his hip, and everything in him softened at once. A photo lit the screen. A little girl. Gap-toothed grin ribbon in her hair, holding up a science fair certificate like she'd won the whole world. Nora. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered to the picture. "The way you talk to someone who isn't there, but somehow still is." A message sat under the photo. "Do you think we can make the robot's arms move tomorrow?" They'd been building it all week. A little cardboard robot at the kitchen table, glue on their fingers, cereal boxes cut into shoulders. And that trailing double question mark was the most important thing in Adrian's entire life. More important than the red light blinking on his screen. More important than any of it. He smiled. "Yeah, kiddo. Tomorrow." And he meant it. Except the red warning blinked again. Persistent, patient, wrong, because if he was reading the code right, and he was almost always reading the code right. Thorne. Dynamics didn't have a glitch. It had a hole. A gap in the wall wide enough to walk through. And in the morning, when the investors filled that glass tower with handshakes and champagne, and money, that hole could swallow all of it. Billions of dollars, millions of private records. Gone before anyone finished their coffee. Adrian closed the laptop slowly. "This isn't my problem," he said out loud. To no one. To the empty hall. To himself. He put the device back on the shelf, picked up his mop, and started down the corridor the way he had 100 nights before. And he made it halfway. He really did. Until the alarm began. Not loud, not the kind that sends people running for the stairs. Just a soft electronic pulse buried under the building's hum so quiet that most people wouldn't even hear it. And of the ones who heard it, almost none would know what it meant. But Adrian knew. He stopped mid-step, mop still in hand, head tilted, listening the way a man listens for a sound he'd hoped never to hear again. A server integrity warning, and not the harmless kind. He stood there in the dim, the cart beside him, the photo of his daughter still warm in his pocket, and he looked back down the hall, toward the glow of Vivian Thorne's office, then toward the elevator at the end of the corridor, the one that went down to the cold floors, down to the machines, down to the part of himself he'd spent 2 years burying under a gray uniform and a squeaking cart. He thought about Nora. I thought about the robot with the arms that were supposed to move tomorrow. And the quiet janitor closed his eyes, because the hardest thing in the world he'd learned was never solving the problem. It was standing there, knowing exactly how, and pretending that you didn't. Down below, somewhere in the veins of that beautiful glass tower, the problem was already getting worse. And Adrian Kessler let out a long, slow breath and started walking toward the elevator. The elevator smelled like cold metal and old coffee. Adrian watched the floor numbers tick down. Executive level, research, engineering. Each one lit and faded, carrying him further from the life he'd built and closer to the one he'd left behind. Just a look, he told himself. You look. You confirm it's nothing. You go home. Except he already knew it wasn't nothing. The doors opened onto the server floor, and the cold hit him first. That deep, refrigerated chill that lives in the belly of every data center. Rows of black towers stretched off into the dim blue lights, blinking in endless quiet rhythm. Cooling fans roaring soft like wind through a canyon. And in the middle of all of it, one tired technician slumped at a console, rubbing his eyes. Evening, the man muttered. Didn't even look up. Evening, Adrian said. He pulled a cloth from his belt and started wiping down a panel near the wall. Slow, casual. The picture of a man doing exactly what his uniform said he did. But his eyes were locked on the monitors. Data streams, traffic logs, security protocols scrolling past in green and white, and there buried in the flow, a tiny spike. Repeating. Every few seconds. So small you'd miss it unless you already knew what you were looking for. Adrian's stomach tightened. Who ran the update earlier? He asked. Easy, offhand, just a curious man with a rag. The technician yawned. Engineering team? This afternoon. Why, no reason. The man leaned back in his chair, the plastic creaking. Honestly, things been twitchy ever since. Keeps throwing these little alerts. Nothing serious. He waved a hand at the screens like they were a fussy child. Corporate's got some big investor thing in the morning. Probably just the system feeling the pressure. Adrian didn't answer. Because those weren't little alerts. Those were test signals. Somebody on the outside was mapping the walls of this place one careful knock at a time, learning where the doors were and how they locked. And whoever it was, they weren't loud, and they weren't clumsy, and that was exactly the problem. The loud ones you could stop. It was the patient ones that took everything. Thing is, the technician said, stretching, you're that guy, right? The one who fixed Thorne's laptop earlier. Adrian paused, just slightly. Just rebooted it. Still, the man chuckled. Word travels fast up there. She was ready to fire somebody before that. You probably saved a job. Adrian gave a small nod and kept wiping, and thought if this holds through the night, saving a job is going to be the least of anyone's worries. He finished the panel, stepped back, rolled his cart toward the elevator with the unhurried patience of a man clocking out. But his mind was already running the numbers, already tracing the shape of the thing, and the shape of it scared him. Because it wasn't random. Because random attacks were loud and stupid and easy to swat. This one had a rhythm. Back in the elevator, rising now, the cold falling away beneath him, Adrian pulled out his own scratched black laptop and opened it against the handrail. The diagrams bloomed across the screen. And this time, he wasn't guessing. This time he pulled the update log itself, the actual patch the engineering team had pushed that afternoon, and he read it line by line. And somewhere around line 200, his hands went still, because the patch wasn't broken. It had been changed, not by accident, not by some sleepy engineer fat-fingering a config file. Someone had reached into that update quietly, deliberately, and moved one small thing, a single line between the authentication layer and the firewall handshake. So small, so elegant, the kind of change only someone who understood this architecture from the inside could ever make. The kind of change he might have made himself. Once. In another life. The elevator chimed. Executive floor. And Adrian just stood there for a second, staring at the screen, feeling the floor tilt under him in a way that had nothing to do with the elevator. Someone did this on purpose. Someone who knows the walls. He stepped out into the corridor and made himself breathe. He should go home. That was the sane thought, the right thought, the one a smart man would follow. Clock out, drive home, kiss his daughter's forehead while she slept, and finish the robot in the morning like he promised. This wasn't his fight. He'd walked away from this fight 2 years ago, and he'd bled to walk away, and nobody in this building had earned the right to pull him back. His phone buzzed. Another photo. Nora holding up the half-built robot, one cardboard arm, dangling by a thread of tape, her face pure delight. Almost done, just needs you. And that was it. That was the whole world right there, 4 inches wide and glowing in the dark. Adrian smiled, and it hurt a little, because he was going to have to keep this from her. Whatever tonight became, she could never know her father had walked back into the room he'd sworn off. She just needed a dad who came home, who made dinner, who was there when the lights went out, and there again when they came back on. A world that stayed put after a world that hadn't. You could quit something whispered in him. Turn around. Right now. Nobody would ever know. Except. He looked up, and Vivian Thorne's office was still lit, which was wrong because it was almost midnight, and the woman had investors at dawn, and any sensible CEO would be home resting for the fight of her quarter. But the glow spilled out under her door and across the corridor floor, and when Adrian slowed as he passed it, he saw her. Not working, just staring. Frozen at her desk laptop, open, the blue light washing over a face that had held a whole boardroom hostage 6 hours ago, and now looked for the first time, uncertain. He should have kept walking. He knew he should have kept walking. Except she looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. "You," she said. Adrian stopped. She turned the laptop toward him, slow, deliberate, the way you turn over a card you've been holding all night. And there on the screen was the exact security diagram he'd been studying an hour ago on his own scratched laptop. The same pathways. The same architecture. Every line. "Explain something to me," Vivian said, and her voice had lost its edge. What was left underneath was worse. Quieter. Sharper. How does the janitor who rebooted my laptop happen to be running a live analysis of my entire company's network? Adrian didn't answer, because there was no answer that ended with him going home. And at that exact moment, deep below, them both buried in the veins of that beautiful glass tower, the soft pulse of the server alarm rose into something else, something louder, something that screamed. The emergency alert tore through the executive floor like a blade. Not the gentle pulse from before. This one was all teeth. Red light strobed along the ceiling, painting Vivian's frozen face in flashes, and the intercom crackled overhead, a voice stretched thin with panic. Security alert. Network integrity failure in server operations. All technical staff report immediately. Vivian was on her feet before the message finished. What was that? It wasn't a question. It was a demand aimed straight at the man in the doorway. Adrian closed his eyes for half a second. Too late. Down the hall, elevator doors slammed open, and engineers spilled out, half-dressed in their panic phones, pressed to ears running toward the stairs. The building had woken up, and it had woken up screaming. Vivian grabbed her laptop and came around the desk fast. "You knew," she said. "I suspected." "You suspected." She stopped in front of him, close now, close enough that he could see the fear she was working so hard to bury under fury. "You were running a map of my network on a mop cart laptop, and now my entire company is coming apart at the seams." Another alarm pulse. Her jaw tightened. "So you are coming with me?" Adrian didn't move. "Ma'am, I really don't think—" "Don't." One word flat as a slammed door. "Don't do the ma'am thing. Not tonight." The alarms kept screaming, and somewhere far below them the machines he used to love were losing control of themselves, and every second he stood here pretending the hole in the wall got wider. He thought about Nora. He thought about the robot arms that were supposed to move tomorrow, and he gave a small, tired nod. All right. They moved for the elevator together. Vivian marching ahead, Adrian a step behind, and God help him. He was still pushing the cart, still gripping the handle out of 2 years of habit, wheeling a mop and a bucket toward the worst emergency this building had ever seen. The doors closed. The floor dropped. "You're going to talk," Vivian said, eyes forward. Adrian leaned against the wall. "Your update this afternoon opened a gap." He kept his voice level, the way you keep your voice level for a frightened animal. "Between the authentication layer and the firewall handshake." Her head turned. "That's not possible." "It's already happening. My engineers built that patch. Somebody changed it after they did." That landed. He watched it land. Watched something flicker behind her eyes, some first crack in the certainty she wore, like armor. "You're guessing," she said. But quieter now. Adrian shook his head. "No." The elevator plunged, numbers ticking, and Vivian Thorne stared at the janitor beside her, like she was seeing him for the very first time. Like the uniform gone transparent. Like underneath the gray fabric and the oil-stained gloves there was a shape she almost recognized and couldn't quite name. "How do you know all this?" she said, and Adrian looked at the doors. At the red numbers falling. At the storm waiting for them at the bottom. "Lucky guess," he said. Except this time, neither of them believed it. And the doors opened onto chaos. Chaos has a sound. It's not one thing. It's 100 things layered on top of each other until they stop being separate. Alarms. Voices. Keyboards hammered like something could be beaten into submission. The roar of cooling fans pushed past their limit. And under all of it, that low electric dread, that fills a room when the smart people stop looking confident. Server operations had become a war room. Giant wall screens flickered red. Data cascaded down them like water over a cliff, too fast to read, too fast to catch. Engineers rushed between stations shouting numbers at each other, and in the middle of it all stood a big man in a wrinkled dress shirt, sleeves shoved up, barking orders like he could out-yell the storm. Desmond Pike, Chief Technology Officer of Thorn Dynamics, the man who'd designed this place, or thought he had. "Shut down external access," Pike snapped. "We can't," someone shouted back. "The intrusion's already inside. Cutting access won't reach it." Pike slammed his fist on a console. "How does this happen? How does this happen the night before?" He saw Vivian then. Cut himself off. "What's the situation?" she said, striding in. All CEO now. The fear from the office packed away somewhere no one would find it. "Someone's inside our architecture," Pike said. "Mapping our servers in real time, live, like they've got the blueprints." His eyes moved past her, found the man behind her. Narrowed. "Why is the janitor here?" Vivian crossed her arms. "He might know something." Pike laughed. Short, ugly. "You're joking." Adrian said nothing. He rolled his cart to the wall, quiet as a shadow, and parked it there the way he'd parked it 100 nights before. And then he just stood, hands loose at his sides, eyes climbing the wall of red, reading it. Because that's what nobody else in that room was doing. They were reacting, slapping at flames. But the fire wasn't the point. The fire was never the point. "We are in the middle of a cyber attack," Pike said, gesturing at Adrian like Exhibit A, "and you brought the cleaning staff." "He saw the breach before your entire department did," Vivian said. Pike blinked. "He what?" She turned her laptop toward him. The diagram Adrian had been running an hour ago glowed on the screen. Every pathway, every layer. Pike stared at it, and for 1 second, 1 single second, the bluster fell off his face. Then he turned to Adrian, slow. "You drew this." "Something like that," Adrian said. Pike's jaw set. He spun back to his people. "I want every external port shut down. Now. All of them." Adrian spoke. Quiet. Almost gentle. "That won't work." Pike ignored him. "Do it." And the engineers moved because that's what you do. When the man in charge gives an order, even when the order is wrong. Fingers flew. Ports slammed shut across the network map. And for a heartbeat, the room held its breath, waiting for the red to recede. It didn't. It surged. A wave of crimson rolled across the wall screen, spreading faster than before, and a young engineer's voice cracked as she called it out. "Sir, it's accelerating. You pushed it deeper." Pike's face went the color of ash. Adrian stepped closer to the console. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You just forced the intruder inward," he said. "They wanted the outer ports closed. Now they're behind your walls, and you shut the doors behind them." Pike rounded on him. "Stay out of this." But another alarm erupted louder, and a message the size of a billboard flashed across the central screen. "Security breach escalation." "They're rewriting our internal pathways," an engineer said, her voice climbing. "They're inside the architecture. They're changing it." And that was the moment Desmond Pike ran out of orders. You could see it happen. The way a man's whole body changes when he realizes he's out of his depth. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at the screen the way a captain looks at water rising over the deck. Vivian's voice cut through it. Low. Steady. "Desmond?" Nothing. Adrian, meanwhile, was still reading. and what he read, he didn't like. Because the pattern on that screen was too clean, too composed. Nobody smashing at a wall moved like this. This was somebody strolling through a house they'd already memorized, opening doors they already knew were there. "Can you stop it?" Vivian said. She wasn't talking to Pike. She was looking at the janitor. Pike heard it, and it lit him up. "Absolutely not," he snapped. "We are not handing our core network to a man who cleans the bathrooms. I don't care what he doodled on a laptop. Desmond. This is insane, Vivian. This is—" "Can you stop it?" she said again. To Adrian. Only to Adrian. And Adrian looked at the cascading red, then at the terrified faces lit up in its glow, then at her. "Yes," he said. Pike laughed bitter. "You." Adrian nodded once. "But you're not going to like how?" Vivian didn't hesitate. "Tell me." He pointed at the map. "You have to rebuild part of your network. Live. While it's under attack." Pike threw his hands in the air. "That's impossible. That would take days. Weeks. You don't rebuild a system this size on the fly. It can't." 3 minutes, Adrian said. The room went quiet. Even the alarms seemed to shrink for a beat. Pike stared at him. "You don't even work here." And Adrian rested his hands lightly on the edge of the keyboard, eyes never leaving the screen, and said the thing that changed the temperature of the whole room. "Actually," he said, "I know this architecture better than anyone standing in it." Nobody moved. And then Pike did the worst possible thing. He laughed, loud, sharp. It bounced off the metal and the glass, and came back twice as cruel. "That's fantastic," he said, shaking his head, playing to the room. "The janitor understands $1 billion security framework. Sure. Why not? Maybe the guy who waters the plants can rewrite our encryption while he's at it." A couple of engineers glanced at each other, uncertain, not laughing. Adrian didn't take the bait. He'd been mocked by better men than Desmond Pike, in better suits, in bigger rooms. The words rolled off him like water, because he'd learned something in 2 years of pushing a cart past people who looked right through him. That being invisible teaches you patience. And patience tonight was the only weapon in the room that mattered. "Fine," Adrian said quietly. "Then let me show you where you're wrong, and you can fire me after." He stepped to the console. Pike moved to block him, but Vivian raised one hand and something in the gesture stopped the CTO cold. Adrian's fingers found the keys, and he pulled up a section of the map nobody had been watching. A quiet corner. Authentication Layer 4. "Your team is chasing the wrong breach," he said. "Everything you're fighting up here," he gestured at the screaming red center of the map, "is a decoy. It's noise. It's meant to pull all your attention to the front door." "And the real one?" Vivian asked. Adrian pointed, low, off to the side. A pathway so ordinary, nobody had given it a second look. "Here." An engineer leaned in, squinting, then paled. "Oh God, he's right. There's traffic on Layer 4. We never flagged it, because it looked like normal internal handshakes. Because that's what they wanted it to look like," Adrian said. Pike shouldered forward, staring at the screen, and Adrian watched the exact moment the man's certainty cracked down the middle. "That's—" Pike swallowed. "That's deliberate." "Yes." "Which means they understand our system." "Better than you do," Adrian said. "Not cruel, just true. And they're using it against you. So here is where it should have turned. Here is where the clever stranger takes the keyboard and saves the day in one clean stroke. That's how the story goes, isn't it? The overlooked man steps up and he's right about everything, and the arrogant ones eat their words. Except that's not what happened. Because Adrian made a call. He'd seen the real breach on Layer 4, and his instinct honed years ago in a life he'd buried told him to wall it off. Isolate the pathway. Choke the intruder's access to a single dead corridor and starve it out. It was the right move. It had always been the right move. He started typing. "I'm sealing Layer 4, he said. "Cut them off from the branch. They lose their foothold. We buy time, too." His fingers flew. The command went out. A wall slammed up across the screen, red light hitting it and stopping cold, and for one shining second the room exhaled. The intruder stopped. Pike almost smiled. "It's working." And then the red light didn't retreat. It split. It split into 3, then 6, then a dozen streams. And they didn't go around the wall Adrian had built. They went through it. Because the wall was exactly what the intruder had been waiting for. The whole thing, the decoy up top, the quiet knock on Layer 4, all of it had been bait to make him do precisely this, to seal that corridor, which triggered something underneath it. A trap laid inside a trap. Adrian's stomach dropped. "No," he breathed. New alarms. New red. Worse than before, because now it wasn't spreading through the network. It was spreading through the parts he'd just touched. Following his own command, deeper into the core, like it had been given a map. Because it had been given a map. His map. "What did you do?" Pike said. And there was something almost triumphant in it. "You said you knew this system. You said 3 minutes. What did you do?" And this is the part nobody expects. Adrian didn't have an answer. He stood there, hands frozen over the keys, watching the red bleed across the screen, watching his own certainty come apart in real time. And for the first time all night, the calm cracked. Just slightly, just at the edges, because he'd been wrong. "I was wrong. I sealed it, and I was wrong, and now it's I made a mistake," he said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Pike blinked. Even he hadn't expected that. Because a con man doubles down. A fraud gets louder. But Adrian just stood there and said it plain, in front of all of them. "I was wrong." And the honesty of it was somehow more unsettling than any boast. "They wanted me to seal Layer 4, Adrian said, quiet, to himself as much as anyone. "They built the trap around the obvious move, and I made the obvious move." He shook his head slowly. "I underestimated them." Vivian stepped closer. "Then fix it. I can't just reverse it. Opening it back up now would—" "Then find another way," she said. And her voice wasn't angry. That was the strange thing. It should have been furious. Instead, it was almost soft. "You told me you know this system better than anyone in the room. So the man who built something knows how it fails, doesn't he?" And Adrian looked at her, because she'd said it. Without knowing she'd said it. The man who built something. Just a figure of speech. Just a CEO reaching for a metaphor to light a fire under a stranger. She had no idea how close to the bone it cut. But it did. Something. It reached in and turned a key he'd left rusted for 2 years. He looked back at the screen, and he stopped fighting the attack the way Pike had been fighting it. Stopped trying to slam doors. Because you couldn't outmuscle someone who knew your house. You could only do the one thing they'd never see coming. You could change the house. "Okay," Adrian murmured. Half to the machine, half to a version of himself he'd sworn off. "Okay, you know the map. Fine. So I'll stop giving you a map to know." Pike frowned. "What is he?" "He's not sealing anything. the young engineer said slowly, watching Adrian's commands scroll. He's moving things, the pathways. He's rearranging the whole internal structure. Live. She looked up, half horror, half awe. He's turning the network into a maze. Because that was the thing about a man who'd studied the same walls every night with a mop in his hand. He knew every inch of them, and he knew that the only way to lose a thief who's memorized your house is to move the walls while he's still inside it. Adrian's hands moved faster now. Not frantic, never frantic, just sure. Command after command, pathways folding and reforming the neat, symmetrical architecture. Pike had been so proud of collapsing into something wild and shifting and impossible to predict. On the wall screen, the intruder's red signal, so confident a minute ago, hesitated, then stopped, then began to wander. Because the corridors it had memorized were gone. Every route it had mapped led somewhere new now. Every door opened onto a different room. The predator that had been strolling through the house so casually suddenly found itself lost in the dark, reaching for walls that kept moving. "It's slowing down," the engineer whispered. "It's confused," another said. Adrian didn't celebrate. He just kept typing, jaw-tight eyes, moving, rebuilding faster than the intruder could relearn, staying one turn ahead in a maze he was drawing as they ran through it. Vivian watched him. And what she watched wasn't a janitor. It wasn't even a clever amateur who'd gotten lucky twice. It was a man who moved through that system like it was part of his own body. Like he'd built every wall he was now tearing down. Like he was somehow coming home to a place he'd spent 2 years pretending he'd never lived. The red signal froze on the screen, trapped between shifting corridors, lost. The room went very quiet, and Vivian Thorne looked at the man in the gray uniform, oil on his gloves, mop cart parked against the wall behind him, and she felt the first cold whisper of a truth she couldn't yet name. "Who are you? Who are you, really?" Adrian's fingers slowed. The last command went out, and the beautiful, terrible maze he'd built out of her company settled into place around the intruder like a fist closing. He let out a breath. "That'll hold it," he said. "For now." "For now," Vivian repeated. He turned to look at her, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not triumph, grief almost. "For now," he said again, "because whoever this is," he nodded at the frozen red light patient, "even in its confusion, they're not going to panic. They're going to study the maze, and when they understand it—" He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. "They're better than I thought." The alarms had quieted. The red had stilled, but nobody in that room felt safe. Because the man who'd just saved them was staring at the screen like he'd recognized something. And he didn't look relieved. He looked like a man who'd just heard a voice from his past. For a little while, the room let itself believe it was over. The red had gone quiet on the wall screen. The alarms had softened to a low murmur. Engineers slumped back in their chairs, wiping their faces, and somebody actually laughed, that shaky, giddy laugh people make when the plane lands hard but lands. Desmond Pike loosened his collar and pretended he'd never doubted a thing, and Adrian just stood there, watching the frozen red light, waiting, because he knew better than to trust a quiet. Vivian noticed. She always noticed. She came to stand beside him, arms crossed, following his eyes to the still point on the screen. "You don't think it's over?" she said. "No." It stopped. "It's thinking," Adrian said. And on the screen, as if it had heard him, the red light pulsed. Once. Slow. Patient. almost curious. The whole room went still again. "There," Adrian murmured. "There it is." The signal moved. Not the frantic thrashing from before, not a thief clawing at moving walls. This was different. This was careful. It slid down one corridor, met a dead end, and instead of panicking, it stopped, considered, backed up, tried another, learning. "It's mapping the maze," Adrian said. "The one I just built. It's already learning it." Pike frowned from across the room. "That's impossible. You rebuilt the entire internal structure. Nobody could relearn that in 10 minutes, Adrian said. Pike blinked. "What? That's how long before they've got it memorized?" "Maybe less." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I told you, they're good." Because here is the thing, nobody in that room understood, except him. A maze only works once. The first time, it's chaos. It buys you minutes. But a patient enough mind, a good enough mind, will walk the same corridors over and over until the chaos becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes a map, and then you're right back where you started. Except worse. Because now they know you'll change the walls, and they'll be ready for it. "So change it again," Vivian said. "Build another maze." Adrian shook his head. "That's what they want." "Why?" "Because every time I rebuild, they learn how I rebuild." He rubbed his temple. "Do it enough times, and they stop chasing the maze. They start predicting me. And a man you can predict." He trailed off. "You don't want to be the predictable one. Trust me." Vivian studied him. "Then what do we do?" And Adrian was quiet for a long moment, watching the red light move through his corridors with that awful patient intelligence. Because part of him, the ugly honest part, felt something he didn't want to feel, respect. Whoever this was, they were beautiful at it. Elegant. They moved through his architecture the way a dancer moves through a routine they've done 1,000 times. And there was something familiar in it, something in the rhythm of it that scratched at the back of his mind like a name he couldn't quite recall. "I know this. I know this hand. Where do I—" He shook it off. "We stop trying to keep them out," Adrian said slowly. Pike stared. "You want to let them in. I want to choose where they go." He stepped back to the console. And this time, when his fingers found the keys, he wasn't building walls. He was building doors. False ones. Dozens of them. Corridors that looked like breakthroughs and led nowhere. A whole architecture of temptation, every path more inviting than the last, all of them, curving quietly toward a single point. "You're building bait," the young engineer said, watching the map bloom with new pathways. "I'm building a story," Adrian said, "one they'll want to believe. Because the trick was never brute force. The trick was to give a clever mind exactly what it expected to find. Make the trap look like the reward. Make the cage look like the vault, and let their own confidence walk them straight into it. There's one real path," Adrian said, pointing to a single corridor threaded through the maze of fakes. "It looks like the fastest route to your client vault, the cleanest line. Exactly the route a smart attacker would take, because it's exactly the route they'd take if they thought they were winning." Vivian leaned in. "And where does it lead?" Adrian typed one more command. A hidden chamber appeared on the map, sealed on every side but one. A room with a door that only opened inward. "A containment loop," he said. "They go in, the door closes, and their system locks itself inside my network instead of the other way around." Pike's mouth fell open. "You're turning the attack back on them." "Something like that." And the room watched breathless as the red signal drifted through the maze. Down one false corridor, then another, circling, testing, getting closer, always closer to the one path that felt like victory. "Come on," Adrian whispered. "Not to the room, to the light, to the mind behind it. You're smart, you're so smart. So take the smart route. Take it." The signal reached the mouth of the real corridor and stopped. The whole room leaned forward as one. "It sees something," Pike breathed. "No," Adrian said, but quieter now, less sure. "It's verifying. It doesn't trust an easy win. It's checking." The light hovered at the threshold, pulsing, thinking, and Adrian's hands hung motionless over the keys because one wrong move now, one twitch, and the intruder would smell the trap and vanish, and they'd lose the only chance they had to find out who this was. Seconds crawled past. The fans roared. Somebody's chair creaked. And then the red light slid forward, into the corridor, down the clean, bright, tempting line toward the vault that wasn't a vault. "Almost," Adrian breathed. "Almost." The signal reached the final threshold, crossed it, and Adrian hit the key. The trap closed like a fist. On the screen, the corridors behind the intruder sealed one after another, walls slamming down in sequence, cutting off every route back. The red light lunged for the exit and found it gone. Lunged for another and found that gone too. It bounced against the sealed walls of the containment chamber, frantic now, all its patient grace collapsing into something wild. "It's trapped," the engineer whispered. "It's actually trapped." Pike stared at the screen like he was watching a magic trick he couldn't explain. "You caught them?" "Not yet," Adrian said. "But now they have to talk to us to get out." He typed. Fast, because the moment the intruder's system got locked inside his network, it started doing what any trapped system does. It started communicating, reaching, trying every handshake, every protocol, looking for a crack. And every one of those attempts left a trace. "When they entered the loop, their machine started talking to ours," Adrian said. "And I'm listening." Data streamed across the console. Rows of it. And slowly, line by line, it began to resolve into something. A relay. A connection. A signal threading back through the dark toward its source. "You're tracing it," Vivian said. Adrian nodded, eyes locked on the screen. Pike scoffed, but it was weak now, the sound of a man clinging to the last of his doubt. "Good hackers bounce their signal through a dozen countries. Relay servers, anonymizers. You'll chase that trace across the planet and never find." "Normally," Adrian said, "you'd be right." He typed again. The data shifted, refined. A new set of numbers scrolled up and then slowly began converting into something else. Coordinates. Pike leaned in. "Wait." The signal wasn't bouncing across continents. It wasn't threading through some server farm in the middle of nowhere. It was coming from one place. One single steady, unmistakable point. Close. "That can't be right," the engineer said, staring. That's local. That's inside the city." Adrian's eyes narrowed at the screen, because the coordinates kept refining. City, district, block. And then, impossibly, they didn't stop at a building somewhere across town. They kept going. Down, in, closer, until the marker settled. And Adrian went very still. "What?" Vivian said, watching his face. "What is it?" He didn't answer at first. He just stared at the location blinking on the screen, and something moved behind his eyes. Something cold, because the trace hadn't led out into the city at all. It had led back. back through the walls of the very tower they were standing in. "It's not coming from outside," Adrian said quietly. The room fell silent. "What do you mean?" Pike said. Adrian turned the monitor so they could all see it. The little blinking marker. Its address. Not a criminal hideout. Not a rival company. Not a basement in some far-off place. The signal was coming from inside the building. That's... Pike squinted at the coordinates. Went pale. "That's our floor. That's the engineering floor." "Somebody's in the building," the young engineer breathed. "Somebody's here, right now, attacking us from inside our own." "Not just somebody," Adrian said, and his voice had gone flat and careful. The voice of a man reading something he didn't want to read. He pointed at the login signature the trapped system had been forced to reveal the credentials threading through the trace. "This account, it's not stolen, it's not spoofed, it's real. It belongs to someone with deep access, someone who helped build the infrastructure." Vivian's arms tightened across her chest. "You're telling me one of our own people did this?" "I'm telling you," Adrian said, "that whoever this is, they didn't break in. They already had a key. They've had one the whole time." Pike had gone quiet. Really quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a man does the math and doesn't like the answer. "Desmond," Vivian said. "That access level. Who has it?" Pike swallowed. "Only a handful of people. Senior engineers. People who were here when we built the core." He shook his head slow. "People I trust." "Trusted," Adrian said softly. And on the screen the trapped signal did something new. It stopped fighting. The frantic bouncing against the walls just stopped. The red light went still inside its cage, and somehow that was worse than the struggle. Because it wasn't the stillness of defeat. It was the stillness of a mind that had realized it was caught and had stopped wasting energy, and was now very calmly deciding what to do about it. "That's not good," Adrian murmured. "What?" Pike said. "It stopped. It's contained. That's good." "No." Adrian leaned toward the screen. "It's too calm. A trapped attacker panics, thrashes, tries everything." He watched the still red light. "This one's not panicking. This one's thinking." And then the light pulsed. Once. And a cascade of new commands began to fire out of it, fast, precise, all aimed at a single target. The young engineer read them, and her face drained white. "Sir, the system logs. Something's overwriting the system logs." Pike spun. "What?" "The access records. The trace data. Everything that proves who did this?" She looked up, stricken. "It's being deleted. All of it. They're wiping the evidence." A new timer bloomed on the central screen, red and merciless, counting down. Total log purge 0241. "They can't escape," Adrian said, and for the first time there was something almost like admiration in the horror. "So they're erasing themselves instead. If they can't get out clean, they'll make sure we can never prove they were here at all." "Then stop it," Vivian said. "Stop the deletion." "I'm trying." His hands were already moving, but they buried the command deep. Every time I block one path, it opens another. They planned this. This was always the backup. Get caught, burn the record, walk away, a ghost. The timer fell. 0220, 0216, 40% gone. The engineer called out, her voice cracking. 50. Pike grabbed the back of a chair. "If those logs go, we lose the identity. We lose everything. The attack, the proof, the person gone. It'll be like it never happened. And tomorrow morning we shake hands with our investors, and we don't even know there's a traitor standing in the..." "Desmond." Vivian's voice cut him off. Sharp. Not helping. Adrian's mind raced. Because the intruder was faster than he could block, and every second the deletion ate deeper into the record. He couldn't stop it head on. Couldn't out-type a machine tearing through its own tracks. So stop trying to stop it. Think. They have to stay connected to keep deleting. They can't wipe and run at the same time. They have to hold the line to finish the job. Which means, wait, Adrian said. And something shifted in his face. They made a mistake. Vivian leaned in. What kind of mistake? To keep deleting the logs, they have to stay locked to our system. The faster they wipe, the more they have to talk to us. A grim spark lit in his eyes. And the more they talk to us, the more you can hear them, Vivian finished. Adrian nodded, already typing. They think they're erasing their trail. But every deletion command is a fresh signal. And every fresh signal is a thread. His fingers flew across the keys. They're so busy burning the map that they don't realize they're drawing me a new one. The timer fell. 1:30. 15. 60% gone, the engineer said. But her eyes were on Adrian's screen now, watching a second trace assemble itself out of the deletion commands, sharper than the first precise where the first had been vague. Because the first trace had given them a floor. This one was giving them a desk. The coordinates narrowed. Engineering floor, row by row, workstation by workstation, and then the marker locked on to one. Workstation C17. That's a real machine, Adrian said. That's the source. Whoever's doing this, that's where they're sitting. Or where they were. Vivian was already turning toward the door. Then we go. Now. Desmond with me. The logs, Pike started. If we shut down the machine sending the commands, Adrian said, standing, the deletion stops. We don't have to win the race. We just have to unplug the runner. He grabbed the tablet, the trace still live on it, the timer still falling. 54. But we have to move, because whoever's at that desk just felt me find them. And they know we're coming. The timer blinked, 48. And somewhere 2 floors up in a dark row of engineering workstations, a chair that would have been empty had just been pushed back from a desk. And the person who'd been sitting in it was gone. The elevator ride up was the longest 30 seconds of Vivian Thorne's life. She watched the numbers climb, watched the red timer on Adrian's tablet fall in the same breath. 51 seconds, 44. The 2 numbers racing each other in opposite directions, and everything the company, the morning. The last 30 years of her life, hanging in the space between them. If those logs finish deleting, Pike said, pacing the small box of the elevator, we lose the proof. We lose the name. We won't, Adrian said. You sound very sure for a man who was wrong an hour ago. Adrian didn't rise to it, because Pike wasn't wrong. He had been wrong an hour ago, and the memory of it still sat cold in his chest. But he'd learned the shape of this attacker now, learned the rhythm of that patient, elegant hand, and the more he learned it, the more that whisper at the back of his mind grew louder. I know this hand. I've seen it work before. Where the doors opened, and the engineering floor spread out before them, bright and ordinary, and completely unaware. Rows of workstations. Developers hunched under white light headphones on lost in their screens. Half of them not even aware their company had nearly died 2 floors below them in the last 20 minutes. Vivian moved through them like a blade. People looked up. Because executives don't walk the engineering floor at midnight, and CEOs never do, and the sight of Vivian Thorne, striding between the desks with fury on her face, made heads turn all down the row. C-17, Adrian said, checking the tablet. Back corner, that way. They moved fast, past desk after desk, and the timer fell. 31:00:28, and then they saw it. One workstation back in the corner, its chair pushed out at an angle. Empty, but its monitor still glowing. And on the screen lines of command code scrolling, fast and merciless, the deletion still running, still eating, the company's memory alive, one record at a time. Adrian dropped into the chair. Vivian stood over his shoulder. Pike scanned the room wild-eyed. "Where is he?" Pike said. "Whose desk is this?" "Somebody whose desk is this." A young developer stood up 2 rows over, pulling off his headphones, confused. "That's that Silas's desk. Silas Brandt." And Adrian's hand stopped over the keyboard. Just for a second. Just long enough that Vivian saw it. Because the mem hit him. Somewhere old. Somewhere buried. Silas. And all at once, the whisper at the back of his mind stopped being a whisper and became a voice, clear and terrible, because he knew that hand. He'd always known that hand. He'd trained that hand. Silas. "No, you know that name," Vivian said. "Not a question." Adrian didn't answer. He couldn't not yet because the timer was still falling and the logs were still dying, and there would be time to fall apart later. He looked back at the screen and saw the truth of it. The deletion command wasn't even being run from this desk anymore. The workstation was still connected, still the anchor, but the commands were coming from somewhere else now. A remote terminal. A second device reaching in through this machine like a hand through a doorway. "He's not here," Adrian said. "He set this desk as the anchor, and he's running it from somewhere else in the building." "Where?" Vivian said. Adrian traced it. Fast. The remote signal threading back through the network, and this time it didn't lead to engineering. It led up, higher, to a terminal that only a handful of people in the entire company could even access. "The executive floor," Adrian said quietly. Pike went still. "That's not possible. Those terminals are locked to board-level access," Adrian said. "I know." He looked at the timer. 00:19, 00:16. "There's no time to chase him," Adrian said. "If I cut the anchor here, the whole deletion collapses. It's running through this machine. Kill this and the logs live." "Then kill it," Vivian said. His hand hovered over the key. Because there was a risk, a real one, that severing it wrong would trigger exactly the fail-safe they were racing. But he'd stopped guessing an hour ago. Now he knew. He'd learned this hand, and he knew how this hand tied its knots. He hit the key. The workstation disconnected. The scrolling code froze mid-line. And the timer on the central system 2 floors down, and here on his tablet, both at once stopped. 14. The logs held. The room let out a breath it hadn't known it was holding. The young developer sagged against his desk. Pike put a hand over his mouth. And somewhere in the network below them, the company's memory, the whole record of who had done this, and how sat intact, and safe, and damning. "We have him," Vivian said. "The logs that trace the name, we have all of it." But Adrian was already standing, already looking up, toward the ceiling, toward the executive floor above them, where a board-level terminal was still warm from a hand he'd trained a long time ago in a life he'd tried to bury. "He's still up there," Adrian said. "He never left the building." Vivian's jaw set. "Then let's go meet him." The executive floor was quiet when they stepped off the elevator. Not the busy quiet of engineering. The heavy quiet of a place where important things happen behind closed doors. The city glittered through the glass walls, indifferent, beautiful. And down the corridor, one conference room glowed with light. Someone was still there. They walked toward it. Vivian first, Adrian behind her, and with every step the weight in his chest grew heavier, because he already knew who he was going to see, and the knowing was worse than any surprise could have been. Vivian pushed the door open. 3 members of the board sat around the long table papers spread out before them, prepping for the morning's presentation, like the world hadn't nearly ended beneath their feet. They looked up, startled. "Vivian," one of them said, "what's going on? It's the middle of the—" She wasn't listening. Her eyes were moving across the room, counting, and landing on the one chair that sat empty, pushed back a laptop, still open in front of it. "That seat," Pike said slowly, "that belongs to—" The door at the far end of the room opened, and a man walked in. Calm, unhurried, adjusting the cuff of a suit that fit him too well, the way a man adjusts his sleeve when he wants you to see how steady his hands are. He was younger than Adrian by a decade, sharp-featured, easy in his own skin, Silas Brandt. He stopped when he saw the room. Vivian, Pike, the board. And then his eyes found the man in the gray janitor's uniform standing quietly by the door, and something moved across his face. Recognition. And underneath it, something older and darker and more wounded than any of them could have named. "There you are," Pike said low. But Silas wasn't looking at Pike. He was looking at Adrian. "No," Silas said softly, almost to himself. A small, disbelieving laugh. "No, that's not, it can't be you. They've got you pushing a cart." The room went silent. Vivian looked between them. "You know each other." Silas laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Know him." He shook his head slowly. "He taught me everything I know, every line of it. The architecture, the frameworks, all of it." He gestured at the walls at the building, at the whole glittering empire around them. "You want to know who really built the thing you're all so proud of?" He pointed at Adrian. "Him, not the company, not the board, him." The board members stared. Pike's mouth opened and closed. Vivian turned slowly to Adrian. "Is that true?" Adrian didn't look away from Silas. "Yes," he said quietly, because there was no point in hiding it anymore. The uniform had gone transparent for good. 6 years ago, Adrian said, I designed the core architecture, the security framework this whole company is built on, and I trained the people who'd carry it forward." His eyes stayed on Silas. "He was the best of them, the most talented person I ever taught. I used to tell him he'd surpass me someday." "I did," Silas said, bitter. "I surpassed all of it. And you know what they gave me for it?" Nobody answered. "Nothing." His voice cracked just slightly on the word. When he left, he jabbed a finger at Adrian. When he walked out and disappeared, they needed someone to finish his work, to maintain it, to make it better. And I did. For 2 years I did. I rebuilt half of what he left behind. I patched the holes nobody else could see. He looked at the board, at the men who'd been prepping their investor slides. And when it came time to put a name on it, when it came time to say who'd kept this empire standing, you scrubbed me out. Every record, every credit, like I was never here, like I was invisible. And there it was. Adrian felt it land in his own chest like a stone dropped in still water, because he knew that word. Invisible. He'd worn it himself for 2 years in a gray uniform, pushing a cart past people who looked straight through him. He knew exactly what it did to a person, that erasure. He'd chosen his. He'd wrapped it around himself on purpose, to hide, to heal, to be a father. But Silas hadn't chosen it. Silas had had it done to him. 2 men, the same wound, and 2 completely different answers to it. So this was the answer, Adrian said quietly. Burn it all down. Prove they were fragile, Silas. You were going to hand a $1 billion breach to the investors in the morning. You were going to destroy everyone who works in this building. The engineers, the assistants, the people who clean the floors. None of them scrubbed your name. None of them even know your name. They'd know it after tonight, Silas said. They'd know it as the man who ruined them. At least they'd know it. Silas's voice broke fully, and for a second, the polished suit and the steady hands fell away, and what stood in the room was just a young man who'd been erased and couldn't bear it. You don't get it. You never got it. You could walk away. You chose to walk away. But some of us just get deleted, and we don't even get to decide. The room was very still, and Adrian took a step toward him. Not angry, not triumphant, just tired and sad, and terribly kind. I do get it, he said. That's the thing, Silas. I get it better than anyone in this room. He looked down at his own hands, the oil-stained gloves, the worn cloth at his belt. You want to know why I left, Adrian said. You want to know why the man who built all this walked out and started pushing a cart? Nobody breathed. My wife got sick, Adrian said, 2 years ago, and then my wife died, and I had a little girl at home who'd just lost her mother, who was 7 years old, and couldn't sleep unless I was in the house. His voice stayed steady, but it cost him. So I made a choice. I chose her. I chose the school pickup line and the cardboard robots and the small apartment where the lights come on at the same time every night. I didn't disappear because the company erased me, Silas. I erased myself because there was something I wanted more than a name on a wall. Silas stared at him, and something in his face began to come apart. Her name is Nora, Adrian said softly. She's 9 now. And tomorrow morning, before any of this matters, I promised her we'd make a cardboard robot's arms move. That's the whole reason I'm still standing here instead of home in bed. Because I thought I couldn't walk past a building full of people, about to lose everything, and pretend I didn't know how to help. He held Silas's eyes. The same way I couldn't have walked past you 6 years ago, if I'd known what they were going to do to you. I'm sorry. I should have stayed long enough to make sure they wrote your name down. I didn't. And that's on me. The silence after that was the loudest thing in the room, because Silas had come here, armored in his rage. He'd built a whole night out of it, a whole revenge, and he'd been ready for the fury of the board, and the shock of the CEO, and the arrogance of Pike. He'd been ready for all of it. He hadn't been ready for the one man who understood. You could have had everything, Silas said. But it came out small now, shaking. You built all of it, and you gave it away for a school pickup line. Yeah, Adrian said, and he almost smiled. Best trade I ever made. Behind them, the conference room door opened again. 2 security officers stepped in, quiet, professional. Pike had called them from the elevator without a word. Silas saw them. His shoulders dropped, because the fight was over, and some part of him seemed almost relieved that it was. I didn't run. He didn't rage. He just looked at Adrian one more time, and the bitterness had drained out of him, and what was left was only tired. You really don't hate me, Silas said, like he couldn't understand it. No, Adrian said. I know exactly how you got here. I just wish someone had reached you before you got all the way." The officers moved to either side of him. Silas let them. And as they walked him toward the door, he glanced back one last time, not at the board, not at Vivian, but at the man in the gray uniform. "For what it's worth," Silas said quietly, "the maze was beautiful. I've never seen anything like it." "I know," Adrian said. "I taught you to see it." And then Silas was gone, and the door closed, and the room let out a long breath. Vivian stood very still for a moment. Then she turned to face the man who'd been mopping her floors for 2 years. "You saved this company," she said. "I fixed a problem," Adrian said, reaching for the cloth at his belt out of pure habit. "That's all." "No." Pike of all people said it. He'd sunk into a chair, and he looked up at Adrian with something on his face that hadn't been there all night. "No, that's not all. You built the wall that protects this place, and then you saved it from the one person good enough to break it. And you did it in a janitor's uniform while I called you." He stopped, swallowed. While I said what I said, Adrian looked at him, and there was no cruelty in it. "You were scared," he said. "Scared people say things. It's all right." Which was somehow the thing that undid Desmond Pike more than any accusation could have. Vivian stepped closer. "The company was built on your architecture," she said. "Your name should have been on it from the beginning. It's not too late to fix that. I want you back. Not the cart. The role. The one you should have had all along." And Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Because part of him wanted it. He'd be lying, he said, otherwise. The work, the problems worth solving. The feeling he'd had tonight of using every part of his mind again. There was a hunger in that he'd told himself he'd killed. But he thought about the empty chair at his kitchen table. The one neither he nor Nora had been able to move for 2 years. Her mother's chair, still there, still waiting. And he thought about the 9-year-old asleep beneath it across town, who needed her father to walk through the door every single day at the same time, because the world had already proven to her once that people could vanish without warning. And he shook his head. "No," he said gently. Vivian blinked. "No, I appreciate it. More than you know." He glanced toward the window, toward the glittering city, and the small, dark apartment, somewhere in it, where his whole world was sleeping. "But I pick my daughter up from school every afternoon at 3. I make dinner at 6. I'm there when she falls asleep, and I'm there when she wakes up. And I'm not trading that. Not for a title. Not for a corner office. Not for anything in this building." The board members who had spent their whole lives trading exactly those things away stared at him like he was speaking a language they'd forgotten. "Most executives," Vivian said slowly, "would kill for what I just offered you." "I know," Adrian said. "That's kind of the problem, isn't it?" She looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her face, some hard thing softening, because Vivian Thorne had spent 30 years reading people faster than they could read her, and she had never in all that time read anyone quite like this. "Then let me offer something else," she said. "Something you won't turn down." She held his gaze. "Your name goes on this company's history, where it always belonged. Every record, every credit. The founding architecture attributed to the man who built it. And—" She hesitated, and it was strange to see her hesitate, the same for Silas Brandt. What he did tonight was wrong. He'll answer for it. But he answered for something we did to him first. And I won't let this company erase another person the way it erased him. Not again. Adrian looked at her. And for the first time all night, he smiled. A real one. That, he said, I'll take. He picked up the handle of his cart. The same cart. The same squeaking wheel. And he turned it toward the door, and the board members, who had never once looked at him, now couldn't look away. Vivian walked him to the elevator. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they waited for the doors. "Sure. The maze, the trap, rebuilding the whole architecture live under fire." She shook her head. "How did you know it would work?" Adrian thought about it. "I didn't," he said. "Not for sure. But I know the difference between a wall built to keep people out," he glanced at her, "and a wall built by someone who loves what's inside it. The first one just stands there. The second one fights for you." He shrugged. "I built these walls because I cared about what they protected. Silas broke them because he cared about what they'd cost him. In the end, that was the whole difference." The elevator chimed. The doors opened. "Go home, Mr. Kessler," Vivian said quietly. "Go build the robot." And Adrian Kessler stepped into the elevator with his cart, and the doors closed, and he rode down through 40 floors of Thorne Dynamics, a company that after 2 years of looking straight through him, finally knew his name. The city was still dark when he got home. He let himself in quiet, set his keys down soft, and in the small kitchen on the table sat a half-finished cardboard robot, one arm dangling by a thread of tape, waiting for a hand that would come home to finish it. Down the hall, a small voice, half asleep. "Dad, is that you?" "It's me, kiddo," he whispered. "Go back to sleep. We've got a robot to finish in the morning." "Did you fix the computers?" Adrian stood in the doorway of her room, looked at his daughter curled small under the blankets, safe, and the whole night the alarms, the maze, the man he used to be, all of it went quiet in his chest. "Yeah," he said softly. I fixed the computers." "Knew you would," Nora murmured. And she was asleep again before the words finished. And Adrian Kessler stood there in the dark a while longer, watching his daughter breathe. The architect who'd built a fortress and walked away from it. The most important man in a tower full of people who'd never once looked at him twice. And none of it, not the title he'd turned down, not the name they'd finally write back into the walls, meant half as much as the sound of her breathing in the quiet. Because a man can build something that guards $1 billion, and still know that the only thing worth guarding is small and asleep, and waiting for him to come home.